There's a specific kind of embarrassing that only happens when you build the story yourself. When you spend months telling everyone your old team blew it, that you're better off, that the new chapter is going to prove all of it, and then the first real test arrives and absolutely none of it holds up. That's what happened on April 29th, when Angel Reese walked into the United Center in an Atlanta Dream uniform for the first time since Chicago decided they were done with her. The revenge game everyone was waiting for turned into something else entirely. A 29% shooting night, 13 minutes of floor time, a Camila Cardoso block that went viral before the quarter even ended, and an empty chair where Reese was supposed to be sitting before tip-off. This wasn't just a rough shooting performance. This was the entire narrative she spent months constructing coming apart in real time. April 29th wasn't just another preseason date. For anyone following the Reese situation since the trade, this was the game. When a franchise deals you away, when you spend months publicly building the fresh start narrative, the first time you walk back into that building is your moment. That's where you prove the trade was a mistake. That's where you make them regret every decision that led to you walking out the door. Reese had been loud all offseason, expanding her game, shooting threes at a real rate, becoming more versatile, harder to guard. Dream fans were writing entire threads about Chicago's 2026 season being finished before it started. Atlanta was going to be a contender. The Sky were going to spend years staring at those future first-round picks, wondering if they'd made a catastrophic mistake. That was the energy, and Reese helped build every bit of it. Then, the game started. 29% happened. Let's put that number in plain terms because it's easy to glance at a shooting percentage and not register what it actually means. 29% doesn't mean a few shots rattled out on an off night. It means missing more than 2 out of every 3 attempts. And when your entire offensive game is built on physicality and finishing around the basket when you're not a real three-point threat, when you're not initiating pick and rolls, 29% leaves you nowhere to hide. The finishing breaks down and the whole game breaks down with it. She played 13 minutes. The Dream called it a rotation decision. But 13 minutes and 2 of 7 from the field isn't careful workload management. That's a player who couldn't impose herself on the game. And Chicago wasn't even at full strength to stop her. That detail made everything worse. One play captured the entire night better than any stat line could. Picture walking back into the building where you used to be cheered, carrying 2 months of revenge narrative on your back, driving to the basket and getting your layup swatted clean into the third row by the center your old team chose to build around instead of you, in front of those fans. In that moment, that's not a bad defensive play. That's a story finishing itself in real time. Camila Cardoso's block on Reese went viral within minutes, not just because the athleticism was impressive, but because of what it represented. Cardoso is exactly the player Chicago chose to invest in when they decided the path forward didn't include Angel Reese. She's the centerpiece of their rebuild. So when she met that layup at the rim and rejected it completely, the United Center crowd didn't just react to a blocked shot. They felt the entire 2-year story compressed into one single second. The clip spread everywhere before the quarter finished. Comments filled up fast. One post questioned how she appeared to have negative vertical. Another pointed out that her shooting mechanics off the hip hadn't been addressed in years of professional basketball. The underlying point was always the same. Finishing at the basket isn't just Reese's strongest skill. It's essentially her entire offensive package. She doesn't space the floor from deep at a rate defenders respect. She's not creating off-ball screens or functioning as a pick-and-roll initiator. The finishing is the game plan. When the finishing fails this publicly, there's no backup waiting. The Cardoso block wasn't even the only missed layup across those 13 minutes. Every missed attempt around the basket became a screenshot. Low-light compilations were circulating before the final buzzer. One post that kept getting shared said it plainly she hasn't worked on her game at all. Before the game even tipped off, Reese had already handed reporters a story without saying a single word. She skipped pregame media availability, and the timing of that skip on this specific night against this specific opponent was impossible to read as anything other than what it looked like. To be fair, Reese has been open about her media stance. She said directly that she'd rather absorb a fine than sit down with reporters because she believes friendly questions get twisted against her regardless. She discussed it openly on a podcast, making clear that the league's fines aren't much of a deterrent when she's already convinced the session will be used against her. That's her experience, and she's allowed to feel that way. But walking into your first game against the team that traded you and skipping the pregame session doesn't communicate that you're above the noise. It communicates that you already see how the night is going to go and don't want to be on record before it happens. The chair was empty. Reporters noted it. The story wrote itself before the opening buzzer. The contrast that always surfaces in this conversation is Clark. Caitlyn Clark does every interview. Good game, bad game, blowout win, ugly loss. She sits at the podium, answers the questions, and moves on. That consistency is a significant reason why Indiana's fan base keeps growing beyond people who were already watching the WNBA. Casual fans follow players they feel they know. They feel they know Clark because she shows up even when it's uncomfortable. Reese's approach keeps the story centered on off-court friction instead of basketball. Skipping reporters before a game you then shoot 29% in doesn't project confidence. It confirms exactly what the skeptics were already thinking. And the field goal numbers that followed confirmed everything the empty chair implied. The speed of Chicago's roster rebuild the second that trade went through tells you more about Reese's 2 years there than any individual game result ever could. When a player leaves and a franchise immediately attracts a wave of quality free agents who weren't interested before, that's not coincidence. That's the market telling you something very clearly about what was happening inside that building. During the Reese era, the story around Chicago was consistent and unflattering. Nobody wanted to be there. The locker room was described repeatedly as tense and fractured. 2 seasons, no playoffs, and a record that got worse in year 2. Free agents with real options weren't lining up to sign. The franchise looked stuck, and the narrative hardened around Chicago simply not being a destination anymore. Then, the trade happened. Almost immediately, things moved differently. Skylar Diggins-Smith signed. Dejounte Carrington signed. Azura Stevens signed. The Sky acquired Rickea Jackson, a player with all-star recognition in her own right. Diggins-Smith brings years of playoff experience. Carrington is widely regarded as one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. That's not a rebuilding haul built from desperation. That's a real roster assembled with real intention. People close to the organization weren't diplomatic about why the vibe shifted so fast. Reports described players as genuinely relieved. One source said the move was very much needed for the health of the organization. Another described the locker room atmosphere as something that changed immediately and noticeably after the trade. Commentators pointing out that quality free agents avoided Chicago while Reese was there weren't working from hot takes. They were working from exactly what people inside the building were already saying. Chicago didn't just replace one player. They replaced the entire atmosphere she left behind, and the market responded instantly. The Clark and Reese comparison has been a fixture of WNBA conversation since the draft. 2 years in, it stops being a talking point and becomes a straightforward factual accounting of what happened. Same draft class, same starting point, same 2-year window. No excuses about one having more development time or a better situation from day one. The comparison is completely fair because the timing is identical. In that window, Clark's Indiana Fever made the playoffs for the first time in a decade, kept improving the record, kept selling out arenas everywhere they played, kept attracting players with real options who chose Indiana because the product was worth joining. Clark runs an offense that makes everyone around her more useful in ways that actually show up in the standings. Boston gets better positioning because of how defenses account for Clark's range. Mitchell attacks off screens Clark's gravity creates. That core didn't assemble itself accidentally. Those players chose Indiana because the environment was genuinely worth choosing. Reese's Chicago teams missed the playoffs twice. The record got worse in year 2. Players described the locker room as fractured. Free agents with options didn't choose Chicago. The Sky ultimately decided the path forward required sending Reese elsewhere and rebuilding the atmosphere from scratch. The accountability contrast is where this comparison becomes most directly relevant to April 29th. Clark sits at the podium after bad shooting nights, after frustrating losses, after games where nothing went right. She shows up, engages, and moves on. That consistency builds something real over time. Casual fans started paying attention because she let them in consistently, not just when things were comfortable. One player built her franchise into a contender with a locker room people actively wanted to join. The other got traded for draft picks, while teammates were reportedly relieved it was over. The Atlanta Dream aren't built around Angel Reese. That's not editorial opinion, that's what analysts confirmed on air, during, and after the game. Ryan Howard and Alicia Gray are the first and second options in this offense. That's the actual structure. And when Bree Jones returns from injury, Reese drops further down the pecking order, third or fourth option, depending on how rotations develop. For a player who built her entire brand around being the centerpiece the player franchises accommodate their scheme to suit this, is a significant adjustment that hasn't fully been addressed publicly. The fresh start framing centered on freedom, room to grow, coaches who wanted her specifically, a system designed to highlight what she does best. Some of that may be genuinely true in terms of fit and philosophy. But Ryan Howard running the offense in fourth quarter situations isn't temporary. Alicia Gray being the player Atlanta goes to when things get real isn't changing because Reese's shooting percentage improves. The hierarchy exists because those players earned it. Coach Smesko's post-game quote about feeling Reese's presence on nearly every possession while she shot 2 of 7 is what coaches say when they don't want to create a public rift with a newly acquired player. It's roster management, not analysis. And the gap between that quote and what the tape actually showed was wide enough that fans caught it immediately without needing anyone to point it out. The question following Atlanta now is the one that's been following Reese since the trade. Does the change of scenery actually change anything? The mechanics that got criticized in Chicago traveled to Atlanta. The media friction pattern traveled to Atlanta. A new city doesn't fix shooting form. A new coach doesn't automatically resolve patterns documented across multiple seasons. The first data point from this experiment is already on record. Stack everything from April 29th together and the picture doesn't require much editorializing. 29%. 13 minutes. A Cardoso block that needed no caption because everyone watching already understood exactly what it meant. An empty chair before tip-off. Chicago running a depleted developmental lineup and still making Reese look uncomfortable for most of her floor time. Ryan Howard's win getting absorbed into a fresh start narrative, Reese didn't actually contribute much to building. This wasn't one bad night in isolation. One bad night happens to everyone. The context is what separates a rough Tuesday from a story. And the context around April 29th is 2 full years of the same recurring themes arriving at the same destination. Chicago got better the moment she left. The market responded instantly. The tape from her first revenge game is already on record. Atlanta is the experiment now. Whether it ends differently than Chicago did is the only question left worth asking. Stay locked with my channel Simply Explained for more updates.